I thought I'd share a creepy story that happened to my dad and his cousin when they were young. Now, this was about 20 years ago and wasn't really in seclusion, but nonetheless, it is pretty disturbing. When my dad was young, he would sleep over at his cousin's house during the weekends. The house was all one floor, consisting of the front door entrance attached to the living room and kitchen. The living room had a long hallway for the bathroom, his aunt and uncle's room, and then the bedroom where him and his cousin would sleep. His cousin's room was pretty small, with only a bed, dresser, and closet. The bed was pressed against the window, so when they slept, they would face the closet and the doorway. One night at around 3 a.m. or so, my dad recalled seeing shadows emerging from the closet and tried to wake his cousin up without any success. He didn't see or hear anything else afterward, so he fell back asleep eventually. The next night, my dad heard a noise coming from outside the window, just behind the bed. He woke his cousin up successfully this time, and they ran to the bedroom where the aunt and uncle were sleeping. When they went to check, nothing else happened for the remainder of the evening. A couple of weekends later, my dad was over for another sleepover, and here's where it got real scary. At some point in the night, around 1 a.m. or so, my dad once again began to hear something from the closet and saw more shadows moving around. Something he saw that night must have freaked him out more than normal though, because he started screaming, and all of a sudden, a man just sprinted out of the closet, down the hall and out the front door. His cousin woke up, as well as his aunt and uncle. The cops came and did some investigating, but they never ended up finding anything. The assumption was that some creep had been sneaking into the house and hiding in his cousin's closet. The window behind them was an easy lookout for the creep to look in and inspect the area. Overall, it gives me chills whenever they tell me the story. They seem so frightened of it still to this day. I live at the base of a mountain, which is fairly secluded. No humans really go there, except for me and other people from my family. One summer evening, I decided to climb up to the top, which takes about 2 hours. I set off with my 3 dogs. When we got to the Willow maze, which is exactly what it sounds like, basically a field of willows with little trails and very limited vision, the dogs started to act quite weird. While they would usually run ahead on the hike multiple times, this time they stayed right by me and seemed very anxious. Their anxious energy rubbed off on me, and suddenly I felt like there were eyes on me. I could hear rustling in the bushes. And that's when I heard a faint laughter of a man nearby. And that's also when I decided to get the hell out of there as fast as humanly possible. When I got home, I told my dad, and he told me there had been a murder in that area not long ago, but he didn't want to tell me unless he had to, on fear of scaring me from going out ever again. Nowadays, I try to stick to my regular route and avoid that creepy but beautiful Willow maze. I love caving. I absolutely love it. I even joined a caving club. They send you an information packet once a month about featured cave tours. One month, they sent out a packet containing a 7 to 8 hour wild man caving tour. I've been on wild man tours before, and they're not too difficult. Maybe some rappelling or mild climbing. Nothing over an hour though. This one had some real danger. Climb too much to the right and you get stuck. Slip too far and you can fall in a hole. Getting rescued in a deep cave is basically impossible. There were 5 of us, 3 tour guides, me and another person. About halfway through the cave, they let us rest on this shallow ledge thing. that was right next to the biggest drop-off of the cave. The guides told us how with larger groups, they did the typical total darkness and had everyone turn off their headlamps and just look around. When he motioned for us to follow suit, we did so. After about 30 seconds in the darkness, though, there was this sound. Honestly, it sounded like footsteps, then falling rocks, and finally a screech of terror. Immediately, the head guide flipped on his headlamp and looked around us with a panicked glint. He thought one of us had fallen or jumped off the edge. He turned to the other two guides and asked if they'd heard it as well. They did, but they couldn't explain what it was. They hadn't moved at all, and the two of us were still there. He radioed to the surface and asked if any of the other tours were missing anyone. This was about 3 hours away from the start of the Wild Man path, and without our headlamps, it was literally like staring into a wall of black. There was no way an inexperienced or even an experienced caver would have made it that far by themselves. The guides asked us if we wanted to continue with the experience and would understand and refund us if we decided not to. We went along and eventually did complete the tour. Everything else was perfectly normal. I have no idea what that could have been. It certainly wasn't animal footsteps, and that screech was blood-chilling. My family has a cabin in a remote area of the Rocky Mountains. There's this one particular hike nearby that we would always go on when I was growing up. It took you up a large hill, cut down into a ravine, and took you down to an abandoned mining cabin. It was really cool, and the cabin itself was full of old antiques, books, cans, furniture, you name it. Last summer, I took my SO on the hike to show off this cool abandoned cabin to them. It had been about 5 years since I'd last been there, and it took us quite a while to find the trailhead because it was so overgrown now. We hacked our way through brush, and luckily I had a really good memory for the general direction we should be going in. As we were heading down the ravine, we saw the roof of the old cabin. Excited that we'd found our way through all the brush, we started to head towards it. Once we went inside, though, it was completely different than the last time I'd been there. Instead of the cool old furniture and antiques, there was some sort of nest. The nest stretched from floor to ceiling and across 2 entire walls of the cabin. The most unsettling thing about it, though, was that the nest appeared to be made of bones. Not small bones either. There were big ones. One was the size of a human clavicle even. I immediately had this terrible feeling and wanted to get the fuck out as soon as possible. We booked it out of there and ran up the ravine as quickly as our dog could keep up with us. We reached the top in less than 30 minutes and were at the top of the hill where we could look down and see the cabin below. We stopped to catch our breath at the top, which was fairly flat and had a lot of visibility. I decided to use that moment to try and get a signal on the satellite phone from the high point. I got a hold of my mom, and we were having a quick chat. I kept on hearing this strange noise, though. It was off in the distance, and I couldn't quite make it out, but my SO was hearing it too, and getting increasingly uncomfortable. I could finally make out the noise eventually, and I realized that was because it was getting louder and closer. It appeared to be the sound of 2 metal objects being clanked together, like someone banging a spoon against a skillet or something. My dog started to get super defensive and started snarling and barking in the direction of where we'd just hiked out of. Now we were completely freaked out. I hung up the call, we grabbed our packs, and ran the rest of the 2 miles back to our cabin. We reported our experience and gave our photos of the cabin interior to a local forest service, who concluded that the nest was most likely a bear or cougar den. The noise we heard following us out of the ravine, though, will haunt my nightmares for years to come, especially because they concluded it was totally unrelated. We had this huge family event where everyone would take off for 2 weeks and go camping. The campsite took 7 hours to get to and was/is one of the most popular places to go camping in my state. I was around 16, so I brought a friend with me. We stayed in the tent together because we like to stay up late and freak each other out. Well, one night, I woke up having to use the bathroom. The outhouse was near the end of the loop, so it was about a 5-minute walk to get there. I woke my friend up and we headed over together. As we were heading back though, we heard this scream that sounded quite far away. We figured people were having fun over near the cabins or something, but decided to investigate and headed out to the lake. When we got out there, all we could hear was coyotes going insane on the other side. We ran like hell back to the tent. Those damn coyotes were going crazy for the next 30 minutes. Then it was complete silence. That is, until we began to hear something walking around our tent. We could clearly hear whatever it was sniffing around. It plopped down on the outside of our tent. You could see the outline of this huge figure there. We could hear heavy breathing, and then this huge growl as well. It did not sound like a bear to me. It stayed there all night, sniffing our tent and lying next to it. We were completely terrified. Of course, we couldn't scream for help either. That would just startle whatever this was and cause more problems. Eventually, we fell asleep out of terror, and whatever it was had left by the time my family emerged from the camper. I know it was probably a bear, but the sound was much different than you'd usually hear. We found out the screaming from earlier was from an actual bear encounter though. Some couple came out of their camper to find a bear tearing up their campsite. They weren't smart enough to hide the food, or stay inside the camper apparently. I often spend weeks alone in the woods by myself. I used to go on group trips about 2 weekends a month. For 10 years or so, I was practically born into camping, and I really love it. Most of my outings are trips to the Ocala National Forest in Florida and other state or national parks. Most of my odd occurrences are with other people and animals. I've stumbled into neo-Nazi rallies or Klan gatherings several times, multiple interactions with the odd hunter and their tracking dogs as well. Last year, however, finally opened my eyes to the danger of being alone. I was heading to my usual spot in Ocala, a free primitive campground next to a secondary creek. That was when I noticed a Department of Corrections bus. The officer there stopped me and briefly inquired about my reasons for being there. I asked what was going on because I was going to be camping in the area. He said a body had been discovered by the road and was linked to a case in the area. He and the prisoners were there to search the surrounding area. The case was being built for a local man apparently linked to the murders. I left the scene and went home, rather than camping out there. While I was on the way back though, I was thinking the entire time about an occurrence that happened last year when I was alone in my tent. I'd heard footsteps outside. Assuming it was a bear, I pulled the slide on my handgun loud enough to be clearly heard. Rather than an animal noise though, I was startled by a response of the whispered hush of a man's voice, laughing. I thought back on that and realized I'd narrowly avoided becoming a part of that case myself. The man was later caught and arrested and linked to a ton of murders in the area. I think he's still serving time in prison now. I went on a date with a guy from Craigslist. I was 17 years old at the time. I put up an ad looking to meet someone. I don't remember the exact details. A guy responded who lived close to me, and so I emailed him back and gave him my number. He was actually one of the only ones who responded without a creepy message. He said his name was John and that he was 26 years old. This guy John and I spoke for 2 days before meeting. We met on a Friday night. We texted back and forth and he asked if I was single. I said yes, and he asked what kind of food I like to eat because he wanted to take me to a restaurant. I asked him a few questions about himself, and he told me he still lived with his mother but had the top floor all to himself. He was a part-time model, and that made some pretty good money. Judging by his picture, him being a model was a fairly believable story. Friday night comes and John comes to pick me up. He drove a silver 2-door car. He texted me and said he was waiting outside. After checking my hair and makeup one last time, I said goodbye to my parents, telling them I was heading out with friends. Then I left and got into John's car. The first thing I noticed was that he actually looked exactly like his photo. He had pale skin with dark hair and dark eyes. He looked a little bit older in person, but not that much, and he made up for it with snappy fashion sense. Actually, he looked kind of cool, and he was incredibly kind as well. His body language and smile totally put me at ease. Yes, it's really stupid to go on a date you met on Craigslist, but surprisingly, this guy was really normal. We chatted for a while as he started driving away from my hometown towards the highway. He wanted to drive us into the city to go to dinner, which wasn't too far away, only around a 25-minute journey. John started to reveal more details about himself to me on this journey. He told me he was embarrassed to tell me he lived with his mother, that I might think bad of him for not having his own place at his age. John got closer and closer to the highway. I can't tell you exactly what it was. I won't make it up because I don't exactly remember. There wasn't anything creepy going on either. I just suddenly felt put off by him. You know when you're on a date with someone and you're not quite sure, and then they tell you something that's your biggest turnoff? It was that kind of situation. Again, he didn't say anything too creepy, just was very off-putting. As we're getting closer and closer to the turnoff, I tell this perfectly nice guy that I'm really sorry, but I don't feel like going to dinner anymore. I'm not feeling very well. John's initial reaction was one of sympathy. What's wrong? Are you okay? Am I driving badly? I told him I just didn't feel well. Well, John then kept asking me, what did I say? What did I do? I told him it's not him, it's me. I wanted to go home because I really felt ill. Okay, well, let me just drive you around for a bit before I take you back. I don't want to end the evening just like this. I knew without him driving me home, I'd have to walk over an hour, maybe more, so I told him that driving around for a second seemed like a fine idea. Instead of him turning around and heading back towards my house though, he veered off and started heading to the town I knew he lived in. I should mention it was pitch black out, and the town where John lived was surrounded by dense woods. This wasn't even worth mentioning if you took the highway and the proper turnoffs to get there, but instead he decided he wanted to go via the back roads because it was more scenic, despite the fact I couldn't see a thing. John had gone from being incredibly talkative to almost completely silent now. He kept driving further into the wooded area. A few times I'd ask him questions about himself to break the awkward silence. At one point, I even put my hand down on his knee affectionately, trying to regain the friendly, flirty banter we'd had just moments before he blanked me. For the most part, he occasionally answered with soft grunts or nods. It was like he was having a tantrum or something. John pulled into the parking lot for the forest. It was around 9 p.m., so naturally it was totally empty. He slowly drifted along, looking around for other cars, then parked the car right at the end closest to the woods. There was no one else around. I hadn't even seen anyone pass us. No other cars on the way to get there. For 10 minutes, he just sat there, staring into the darkness ahead. It was disturbing. I think I managed to make small talk for about 5 minutes, which is a long time when someone isn't saying anything back. I then joined him in his silence. I was afraid of appearing fake. I didn't want him to think I was scared. So some time of silence goes by when abruptly John gets out of the car, closes the door, and locks it. I was stuck inside. His lights were on, so I could sort of see ahead in front of the car. There was a field that went on for about 20 feet. Then beyond that were trees and dense forests. To the left was the rest of the car park and the exit at the far end. To the immediate right was some more forest with a small path. John disappeared into the area ahead. I tried the handle on the door, but it wouldn't open. I began to rationalize this away. Maybe he'd accidentally locked the door. I was telling myself that if he really wanted to do something, he would have stayed in the car. With no sign of John, I decided I needed to call someone. I looked around for my phone, only to find that I could no longer find it. This was an old silvery pay-as-you-go flip phone. I was confused that I couldn't find it, because I had put it right next to me. After looking for it for a good few minutes, it became sure that he had taken it with him. Mind you, I didn't want to start rooting around his car in case he might be watching me. I didn't want him to catch on that I was freaking out. At that point, I started looking for my phone with only my eyes, instead of making it obvious that I was petrified. My eyes were darting all around. There was nothing there. I looked up and squinted into the field and forest ahead. I saw John. He was standing about 10 feet from the car in that small field. He was standing and smiling, but it wasn't a friendly smile. He looked terrifying. This was not the same guy I got into the car with earlier. I looked ahead and smiled back. I was still trying to act like his behavior was normal, like nothing he was doing was scary at all. Still smiling, his tongue began to protrude from his mouth. He stuck it all the way out, then began wagging his tongue up and down while maintaining eye contact with me. I felt myself trembling. I was trying to compose myself, not taking his eyes off me, and with his tongue still out, he started unzipping his pants and then began to urinate in front of me, all while staring me dead in the eyes. This is the point I found it difficult to act like I was in on his behavior. I looked down at the floor, not wanting to watch what was in front of me. He didn't creep or slink back to the car. Instead, I heard his thundering steps and then a slam against the window. I guess at this point, I was the luckiest person alive because another car pulled into the parking lot. I don't know what this did to John, but immediately he got back in and laughed at me. Normal laughs like earlier, like nothing had been wrong. "So what music do you like? I'll put it on while I drive you home." He did drive me all the way home. When he pulled up to my house, I went for the door, but it was still locked. "I want you to promise me something," he said. I asked him what it was. If you ever see me after this, turn the other way and act like you don't know me. If you see me with my family, don't you dare say a word. I don't expect to bump into you, but don't say anything." I agreed and then asked him, "Have you seen my phone?" He told me no. I guess my phone was a small sacrifice for surprisingly making it home okay. When I got inside my house, I said goodnight to my parents and went upstairs to my room. I then turned on my computer. I wanted to gather as much information about this guy as I could. Back then, I used MSN Messenger, like AOL Instant Messenger. It logged in automatically whenever I started my PC. Now, before I get to the final part of this story, it's important that you know this. One day before, I had been at my best friend's house. We had the kind of friendship where it was like who could pick on the other the most. It was all in good fun, and mostly we just made minor fun of each other and had a big laugh. The day before, my friend had changed 2 contacts in my phone. She replaced the contact mom with the guy I had been texting back and forth with. I knew immediately she had done this because I saw the previous messages come up. I didn't change the numbers back at the time, thinking I would just do it later. When I logged into my MSN Messenger, I had a ton of messages from this guy and a few from my best friend. When John had locked me in the car, he had taken my phone and texted my mom, which was actually still this other guy. He had texted them, "I'm sorry, but I decided to move on. I found someone, so please don't look for me. I'm happy being left alone." The guy I was texting knew this was a big red flag. He responded and texted my phone back saying, "I don't think this is you. I know where you went, and I'm calling the police." Incredibly quick thinking from him. He had absolutely no idea where I was. I think his text saved my life that night, and it explains John's sudden change of behavior. Maybe it wasn't the random car that pulled into the parking lot. Maybe it really was that text.